Seconds away from 2:15, where we will officially get underway. But I want to thank our witnesses for joining us today, and we will do something that's somewhat foreign to Congress, and that is we'll get going early. So, even though it's my second, we will get going early. Want to thank our witnesses for joining us. And today's an incredibly important hearing. It's the fourth of our hearings about things that we need to consider from a policy standpoint in the United States. We've talked a lot about Chinese dominance in the market. We've talked about challenges the United States faces on the mining side. We have also talked about issues with human rights and the use of forced labor by China. Today, our effort is talking about how are we going to look at recycling and polymetallic module harvesting that are known as deep sea seabed extraction. And those things are incredibly important. I think the future, we understand there's a lot of materials that can be very efficiently and necessarily recycled. So I want to make sure that today's focus is on that. And that's part of making sure we develop a sustainable and resilient supply chain. I look at the value chain as really being a circle. Sometimes you look at the value chain being linear, the extraction, the refining, the smelting, the base metal production, the value added, the final production of the value added. And sometimes we forget about the value added product at some point outlives its usefulness, and then it has to get back into the value added supply chain again. So how much of that material can we get back into the supply chain? Happened last year or the year before. Xi Jinping said 25 years ago that China was going to dominate the semiconductor market, and they set out to do that. They set out to open mines across the world. They set out to unfortunately, coerce others into their universe, to use forced labor. And those things are all incredibly important. What we look at today is that unfortunately less than 1% of rare earth elements are recycled. Yet you look at the mass of what comes out of rare earth products, and we have to be able to do more. If you look at some of the legislation and appropriations that created the Department of Energy's Battery Recycling Prize, we're trying to do some things creatively to get folks to innovate, to make sure we're doing the things necessary to get what's needed for this nation. There are some great examples of where recycling is taking place. There's a new company in the middle section of Virginia that is taking titanium, grinding it back into titanium dust, combining it with titanium that's mined in Tennessee. And remember, titanium there is mined as a placer deposit, so it's not hard rock, so it's just the state of Tennessee that has to permit it. And they combine the recycled, ground up older titanium parts with new material, and then they produce recycled titanium, a great way to do that. And if you look at most recycling, combining it with other mined materials, it's a great way to make sure that you maintain steady supply. We know too that these facilities produce black mass, which is a combination of different metals from recycling processes. And unfortunately, what happens today is, where does most of the black mass go? To China. So we have to do a better job there with recycling. I want to make sure too that we are looking at a national level. I met the other day with some people in the Pentagon that are beginning to look at this from a strategic imperative perspective. The Defense Logistics Agency has a strategic materials recovery and reuse program where they're looking at taking products from older defense systems and getting them back into the supply chain by recycling them. All those things are things that we have to do, and we have to do them at the speed of relevance. The technologies are there. The key is how do we make sure we have a consistent demand signal? What's happened in the United States, unfortunately, is the demand signal has been all over the place. So, you have a little bit of demand signal, then it goes away. And, as a business, if you don't have a constant demand signal, there's no way that you're going to make the investments or do the things necessary to sustain that. We have to get to a more sustainable place with those efforts. So we appreciate all that you're doing in that realm. We have to make sure that we are looking at Chinese dominance in the supply chain, as I said, in a circular fashion, not only from cradle to grave, but grave to cradle back again, because that's the only way that we're gonna be successful with this. So I want to turn to my colleague, Kathy Castor, who's been a leader on this, has really been forthright and has been incredible in her thoughts and ideas about not only recycling, but also what are we doing with other sources of minerals on this planet, not on the surface, but below the sea, on the seabed. Those things are going to be key for us. So, Kathy, with that, I'll turn it over to you.
Well, thank you, Rep. Whitman, and thank you all for being here. This is a very important bipartisan work group that comes out of the bipartisan work of the Select Committee on Competition with China. We do fully intend to bring forth bipartisan legislation. It kind of is a follow-on on an economic report we issued last December. But I've really been looking forward to the recycling hearing and hearing from you all too. There are enormous opportunities for businesses, for workers across America, with our allies and partners across the globe. And there is a manufacturing revolution going on across the country. And it's been a blessing to many communities that had felt left behind and left out. Now you see all sorts of manufacturing, especially in the clean energy sector, going on. In fact, a couple years ago, I chaired the Select Committee on the climate crisis, and we had made about 750 recommendations. It was akin to the Select Committee on China, and we adopted over 350 of them into law in the bipartisan infrastructure law, in the Inflation Reduction Act. I remember very well going to Michigan to sit down with a lot of Rep. Stevens' employers there, the automakers, and just was blown away by their vision, the science they were bringing to bear. But some of the answers on batteries we don't have right now. We know that there's going to be a massive turnover in batteries, maybe by 2030, and we want to be able to ensure that we have a circular economy where we are able to recycle and reuse those. And it's been heartening to see many businesses are cropping up, many new alliances. But we're going to have to do so much more, and we're looking for your advice on policy recommendations that we can take and enact into legislation. Are those tax credits? Are those different financing backstops that have been broached? Is it some other kind of Department of Energy loan initiative? What else do we need to be doing when it comes to the Seabed Authority? We need your best ideas, and follow on. Don't let it stop after this sit down today. Go back, talk to your industry compatriots, and have them weigh in with the work group too.
Kathy, thank you. And I want to thank our witnesses today. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule for your long travel days that you're here to join us. We look forward to your perspective on advanced recycling technologies. There's some exciting things going on out there. Your thoughts on incentivizing domestic recovery efforts. And then, too, how do we responsibly explore new sources of critical minerals, especially in places like the deep seabed? So let me introduce our witnesses today. We have Mr. Ahmad Ghahreman, who's the CEO of Cyclic Materials. He will discuss how end-of-life permanent magnets can be repurposed into robust sources of rare earth elements. Mr. Gerard Barron, who is the Chief Executive Officer of the Metals Company. He'll discuss the company's investments in deep-sea harvesting vessels and efforts to refine polymetallic nodules. Gerard, thank you so much. Mr. Kijune Kim, who's Executive Vice President of Korea Zinc. And you're going to discuss critical mineral recycling from the perspective of the industry and how we can effectively look at policies here in the United States to execute that. So, gentlemen, with that, Mr. Barron, I'll begin with you, and then we'll go to Mr. Ghahreman and Mr. Kim, and we will then go from there.
Amazing. Well, thank you, Rep. Wittman and Castor and the Select Committees Critical Mineral Policy Working Group for inviting the Metals Company to contribute to today's important discussion. So thank you. My name is Gerard Barron, as you heard, and I'm the CEO of the Metals Company. And we're a Canadian company, but we're listed on the NASDAQ. And we're the only North American contractor with exploration licenses for seabed resources in an area known as the Clarion-Clipperton Zone. Our company has spent over a decade investing in scientific studies and developing the proper technology to collect and process these critical resources, preparing for what we strongly believe will be a critical resource close to U.S. national security and supply chain vulnerabilities and bolster domestic critical mineral security. And I firmly believe that in order for the United States to outcompete China in the critical mineral space, we must invest in domestic capabilities to harvest and also refine seabed minerals. So in July, several witnesses testified in front of this working group that China had already won, that China is 20 years ahead in the critical minerals game. However, I have a very different story to share about the world's largest undeveloped resource of battery metals, where a Western company, us, not China, is in the lead by about 5 years. And the ending of the story is still unwritten. And the metals in question still have the possibility of being processed here in the United States. So domestic needs for our 4 essential battery metals could be solved with a single resource called polymetallic nodules, like the one in my hand. And it contains 3 critical minerals on the US list: nickel, cobalt, and manganese, plus a lot of copper. And if you sail from San Diego southwest into the Pacific, it will take you 4 days to reach an area known as the Clarion-Clipperton Zone, or the CCZ, where vast fields of these nodules cover the seafloor. They sit unattached at about 4 to 6 kilometer depth, and the USGS estimates there is more nickel, cobalt, and manganese on the seafloor than all terrestrial reserves combined. The collection of these nodules resembles less of the drilling and digging you might associate with mining, and more closely to a golf cart scooping up balls across a driving range. Autonomous robotic collectors hover over the seafloor using negative pressure to gently pick up the nodules and lift them to the surface through a long riser pipe. And this is a process that our team has spent years developing to hone project economics and ensure environmental impacts are minimized. The British discovered these nodules about 150 years ago, but it took an American to see the economic and scientific potential. American geologist John Merrow captured the world's attention in 1965 when he made the case that these rocks could become a major source of supply for meeting the world's mineral needs. And in 1980, Congress adopted the Deep Seabed Hard Mineral Resources Act, which tasked NOAA to deliver an environmental impact assessment for the proposed mining activities. And their final report to Congress in 1995 concluded that adverse effects of a potentially catastrophic nature were not detected. NOAA also warned that delay in deep-sea mining would result in continued dependence on unreliable foreign sources for U.S. strategic metals, increasingly costly infrastructure to support mining operations, and delayed development of domestic technology while foreign competitors proceed, and the loss of jobs for U.S. citizens to land-based mining abroad. And over the course of the following 3 decades, these predictions have unfortunately become reality. So fast forward to the present. The 1994 implementation agreement established the International Seabed Authority to regulate this industry. And today, there are 19 exploration contracts. China holds 3, and so does the company I represent, the Metals Company, sponsored by Pacific Island nations, Nauru, Tonga, and Kiribati. Some of America's greatest allies, including Japan and South Korea, and the UK, France, and Germany, also hold contracts in the same area. But because the United States is an observer of the law of the sea, the US cannot secure access to nodules directly. But the Metals Company is eager to partner with the US to ensure critical minerals from the CCZ nodule fields land here in the USA. We've raised over $500 million in private capital. We've executed more than 25 offshore campaigns, spent over a decade completing the world's largest seafloor to surface research program, and successfully piloted nodule collection and processing technologies. And we've accomplished this with US allies, operating out of the port of San Diego in collaboration with Dutch offshore giant Allseas, and processing nodules at pilot scales in Pennsylvania, Ontario, and now commercial scale trials in Japan. And while the metals company has invested extensive time and research into understanding deep sea resources, we've also been closely monitoring the advancement of other contractors. In 1990, China registered with the United Nations to become the 5th pioneer investor in deep sea mining, behind France, Japan, and others. For over 20 years, China has developed their contracts at the speed of academic research, but they've now switched to commercial mode. My bet is that they'll catch up sooner than anyone expects and erode our 5-year claim. And here's where China currently stands. China has made deep sea minerals in international waters a strategic priority, given that it too is resource insecure. And while not as secure as domestic mines, these resources offer more certainty around availability, taxation, than land-based resources outside their own borders that are prone to nationalization. Second, China actively contributes to the ISA meetings, working groups, and shaping the mining code. And thirdly, China has invested over $1 billion in exploration efforts and technology build-out, created clear mandates for state-owned enterprises, and given them cheap capital to execute. 40-plus Chinese entities are actively developing deep-sea mining technologies. And as China continues to further position themselves in the deep sea, the United States must also actively support deep-sea mining efforts to ensure that the metals from these polymetallic nodules are brought to the USA for processing, to protect national security interests and support the US economy. So we have developed the following recommendations to ensure this. First, the US government should enter into strategic purchase or first right of refusal agreements for polymetallic nodules. It takes capital to further eliminate risks for a new industry, and capital markets want to see offtakes first. The Department of Defense, Energy, and State are well positioned for such offtakes, given that this resource can flex between strategic and economic national stockpiles. Secondly, the US should invest in downstream refining. Primary processing infrastructure exists at lower cost on an expedited timelines abroad, particularly places like Indonesia, while the US is ripe for refining those intermediate products into high-purity battery precursor materials. The US should provide financing for this refining capacity that offers dual use, initially processing virgin ores and recycling those materials in the future. And to secure intermediate feedstock for refining, the US should work with partners abroad like Japan and Korea and Indonesia. We recommend a critical minerals trade agreement for specific non-FEOC operations in Indonesia, given the country's position as the global growth market for nickel on land with extensive smelting operations. And thirdly, the US should create an innovation hub on the western seaboard, offering a deepwater port, research vessels, a deep sea scientists, marine crews, bulk carriers, and logistic terminals. All of these could be American assets and American jobs. And we also need innovation to enable lower cost environmental survey and monitoring technologies, a great goal for an ARPA-E program. And fourthly, as an ISA observer, the USA should make concerted efforts to collaborate with allied ISA members on the contents of the mining code. The US could also allocate with its allies to sponsor renewed exploration of its lapsed nodule contracts in the CCZ, given it cannot sponsor the work itself. Last, critical minerals brought from international waters to the USA by a non-foreign entity of concern should be classified as domestic in origin, creating an incentive for allied contractors to bring nodules to the United States. In closing, I want to thank you again for inviting the Metals Company to be a part of today's conversation as we continue to have to look for ways to build out healthy, secure, domestic critical mineral supply chains. It's imperative that the US is prepared to address what is shaping up to be the world's next theater of global resources, the deep sea.
Mr. Barron, thank you. I couldn't agree with you more on what we have to do. Thanks for your recommendations there. That's exactly what we're focusing on in this group is how do we operationalize this at the speed of relevance. So thank you again. Mr. Ghahreman?
Sure, absolutely. Thank you. My name is Ahmad Ghahreman. I am the CEO of Cyclic Materials, and it's an honor to be here and address you today on the critical issue of rare earth metal and the relevance of recycling. At Cyclic Materials, we are pioneering solutions in rare earth magnet recycling, and we firmly believe that our innovative solutions presents a unique opportunity to address a critical mineral challenge in the US and allied countries. The rare earths are essential to modern infrastructure. We use them in different applications from defense to energy and energy security. Rare earths are the backbone of our economy and our national security and our clean energy future. Rare earth metals market is a $20 billion market today, but it unlocks multi-trillion-dollar industries and infrastructure. However, as you mentioned, less than 1% of rare earths are recycled today. Increasing the pressure to scale domestic mining, all the while that U.S. remains dependent on imports from China. To be clear, China produces over 60% of rare earth minerals. They refine over 90% of rare earth metals and manufacture 93% of magnets. An absolute dominance. China has built this extensive supply chain within the past 30 years, so it's not something that they have done yesterday. Overthrowing the Chinese dominance in the rare earth magnet supply chain requires targeted support from the US government to help establish the industry outside China. Starting a new mine from deposit to metal production often takes 10 to 20 years. And this is a long process and significant upfront capital cost. In contrast, recycling of magnets can be established much faster, within a fraction of the timeline and with fraction of the capital. I started Cyclic Materials back in 2021, and I am very pleased today to announce that our first ton of rare earth products will be shipped to our French partner by the end of this month. From the business standpoint, I see three key challenges which I believe can be turned into opportunities in this space. The first one, price volatility of critical metals, specifically rare earth elements. Let's be clear, we do not control that. Export control on magnet containing end-of-life products and byproducts. This will help to establish industry on the recycling side. I will talk about that more. Strategic funding programs will encourage sustainable long-term growth. First and foremost, we consider stabilizing the pricing index. Currently, the price of rare earth metals is highly volatile, with the Chinese government driving the market fluctuations through oversupplying and withholding critical metals. This unpredictability poses a significant challenge to establishing the North American rare earth supply chain. To counteract this, comprehensive stockpiling certainly presents practical and immediate response. Stockpiling offers a way to manage short-term volatility in the market and help stabilize the supply chain. Basically, buy when Chinese flood the market and sell back to the market when Chinese withhold the metals. Of course, for a sustainable long-term solution, we would need to develop an alternative pricing index decoupled from Chinese government influence. This will require substantial changes and a commitment from both the industry and public authorities. Next, we must address export control. The PRC currently controls 93% of global rare earth magnet production, while United States, this is very interesting, holds the largest above ground reserve of rare earth metals through the products we've consumed. As recycling experts, we can only acknowledge the incredible opportunity this presents, as today less than 1% of those metals are recycled. Seizing the full potential of this recycling industry is not something that we can achieve alone. Today, gaps in our supply chain undermine our ability to keep critical metals within North America. The U.S. currently exports vast quantities of critical metals containing materials in the form of end-of-life products and magnet manufacturing byproducts, commonly called in the industry swarf. As an example, the U.S. exported most of the end-of-life EV traction, electric traction motors last year containing enough rare earths to produce permanent magnets for over 500,000 drones in different sizes. Here is the supply chain. Motors are exported to India, Pakistan, and Malaysia. Magnets and copper are manually separated and sent back to China. To be clear, China indirectly controls the end-of-life product market in the world as well. Implementing regulations for rare earth magnets would not only help close the gaps, it could also provide the critical metals for North American industry and generate significant employment opportunities within the industry as well, from mine to next. We were grateful to observe NDAA report language encouraging the Department of Defense to prioritize and drive strategic metals from recycled sources. We also appreciate report language ensuring DoD reviews and prioritizes its critical materials recycling policy. Finally, funding opportunities and ecosystem development are critical for the industry to establish. At Cyclic Materials, we are beginning our global scaling phase. Actually, I'm very excited today because today's the day we close our next round of funding for our next round of growth. Good news is that a lot of innovative companies are also investing to develop viable solutions. I know from my peers, this entire industry is ready to scale rapidly. We are building in the US and globally ourselves. With government support, we would have greater stability. This would enable us to grow faster and meet the demand for rare earth metals and beyond. However, this growth requires both dedicated project-specific funding sources and the creation of a supportive ecosystem that will help us scale faster and stronger. This includes developing talent, advancing research, and infusion of funding to catalyze growth. While Congress has committed notable investments to critical minerals and critical infrastructure in the recent years, funds available for rare earth metals, more specifically on the recycling side, has been minimal. I will emphasize again that rare earth metals unlock multi-trillion-dollar industries, and like vitamins in our body, we need a little bit of them, but we definitely need them. Building this infrastructure is vital to acceleration of our progress in achieving our strategic goals. In conclusion, while the challenges we face are considerable, the opportunities are greater and encouraging. Recycling provides a sweet, low-cost, and effective solution to support the supply of critical metals, ensuring a stable and sustainable resource flow. We can secure the future of vital industries such as defense, electrification, and energy security by recycling rare earth magnets within the U.S. By stabilizing prices, enhancing export control, and investing in industry growth, we are convinced that together we can build a robust rare earth metals sector in the United States of America. Thank you so much for your attention, and I look forward to this productive conversation.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Ghahreman. Appreciate your perspective there. Mr. Kim, we'll go to you and get your perspective on sort of the international flavor of what's going on.
Thank you very much for providing me the opportunity to present the Korea Zinc position to you. And Thank you very much for this valuable opportunity to present Korea Zinc. And I'm Kijune Kim. I worked 30 years to the Ministry of Trade, Industry, Energy as a government officer. And I joined 2 years for the Korea Zinc. And Korea Zinc is a company founded in 1974. Has grown into one of the most important players in the non-ferrous metal industry, including production of base metals, rare metals, and precious metals. And we have the global #1 technology in production of zinc, silver, and lead, which play a critical role establishing the green technology possible, such as solar and wind power. And we are now constructing the world's largest non-Chinese nickel sulfate in Korea, a key material for the lithium-ion batteries, to be commissioned in early 2026. And the capacity will produce 1.6 million electric cars. And we operate the largest single smelting facility of zinc, silver, and lead in the world in Korea. And our advanced nickel refining plant in Ulsan will employ our own industry-leading refining technology, so major battery manufacturers in Korea and across the globe can have a reliable supply chain outside of Chinese supply chain. And here in the States, the Korea Zinc, we are focused on the raw materials recycling. We operate an e-waste metals recycling company, Herald, which has 4 large-scale recycling facilities across the country in Chicago, Las Vegas, Atlanta, and San Antonio. And April this year, so we acquired a scrap metal trading company based in St. Louis, Missouri, to expand our recycling business. We have invested heavily in collection and trading companies in e-waste and scrap metals to recycle metals to our feedstock rather than procure metals from mines. As you can see that the U.S. has a tremendous investment already, and like the good mines, the U.S. has a great mines for e-waste. So we are working to make it into the reality, as mentioned, the circular economy. And through the U.S. facilities, now we are looking forward to making the black mass from the end-of-life batteries or scrapped ones. And as Chairman already mentioned, that you have the electric vehicles. That means that the critical minerals are included in the batteries. However, what happens now is that Korean companies, with the help of the IRA, we invest a lot to the U.S. And the battery manufacturing is something like an assembly, like the semiconductor industry. It's easy to invest in the U.S. However, the recycling, for this recycling, I want to make it clear that the critical minerals, the primary processing is totally similar to the recycling. So we don't need to just classify the primary processing of the critical minerals from the recycling critical minerals. And having said that, the recycling or the primary processing is the chemical engineering related processing. Then that uses a lot of sulfur acid, so which is raises environmental concern. And Korea Zinc has our own refinery in National Industrial Complex, which governs the very what you call the OECD standards, the environmental regulation. We are monitoring daily basis. So we do care about our environment. However, if we try to invest in any jurisdiction in the US, it's really hard. So having said that, what is happening now is that Korean companies invest in the US by manufacturing the EV batteries. There are some batteries that are below the level of the commercial sales. So the scrapped batteries, they make the auction. And the many companies from the Chinese sources, the East Asia countries, the companies, they get the highest bid. And compared to our bidding, so they have a much higher one, so they got the scrap batteries. And early this year, our colleague had a meeting with the Chinese counterparts, and he heard the complaints from the counterparts that the city government of China, they supply all the money for their acquiring land and expressing the factory and all the utilities for free. Only requesting that you should hire labor, the employees. And the only thing is that for the machinery itself, they should finance themselves. However, in the sector of the critical minerals and the electric car, the EV sectors, the central government finance them 40% or 50%. And their complaint was that they got only 40% of the subsidy for their machinery. However, when they manufacture it, they provided the one biggest company in the China, which has a 50% of subsidy. So that's the complaint. Now we understand how Chinese supported company can make the highest bid to get the scrap batteries because they don't have the capital cost. Only thing they want to have the maintaining their employment there. So what I want to have some recommendation for the U.S. Congress is IRA is a great legislation. It brings a lot of Korean companies and other companies outside of U.S. to invest in the U.S. and creating jobs. However, in some sectors, like chemical engineering related parts of the recycling or refining, it's really hard to invest in. And according to the recent study for the journal Nature, Sustainability last year found that the infrastructure and technology for EV battery recycling will not be ready by 2027. To return the critical minerals from spent batteries in the U.S. So what I want to emphasize here is that Korea, U.S., I was also in charge of some part for the Korea-U.S., the FTA. And in the IRA 30D, there is a description of the critical minerals, the primary processing, you can have tax credit for the FTA countries, okay. However, for the case of recycling, only for the North American companies can be benefited for the tax credit. However, I do see that recently there's no plan of the serious recycling investment is planned or on the way. That means that until the 2032 or the IRA, the duration, I don't see that there's much progress on this. So I'm really afraid that Korea Zinc is a company free from China, either from the technology or from the financing. And we do care that we want to contribute to the collaboration of the U.S. allies. And for this one, I really want to have to contribute that you have your own batteries and critical minerals inside. We want to do what we can do. But for this one, we need some help because to make a level playing ground where the Chinese companies has no fair games, so that we need your help. So that's the reason why I'm here to present the Korea Zinc case and to collaborate in the near future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Kim. That's a great perspective on what we can do to companies like Korea Zinc and Korea in general to make sure we do more. Leveraging with our partners today is going to be key. We can't do this by ourselves, and there's a lot of great technology out there with our partners that's there today. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. Sometimes we get a little arrogant here and think that we're the only people that can do this. That's not the case, especially today. Let me start with a few quick questions. I want to go to my colleagues. Mr. Barron, you talked about the critical nature of deep seabed mining. You gave some great suggestions about how we can get underway with that. You also talked about where the metals company is, which is significantly ahead of a lot of others. I know there's one other U.S. company that's also in the same space. Give me your perspective. You talk about relationships with Indonesia. There's also some technology and capability in refining there in Australia. Give me your perspective on what is the best path forward? Your suggestions, I think, are spot on. But what is the fastest path forward for the United States to realize existing capabilities and investments that are made by companies like the metals company, and how we can operationalize it? You talk about port facilities. You talk about things that we can do to kind of break down some of the barriers there. But listen, we know we're not a signatory to UNCLOS. We know that doesn't necessarily knock us out of it. It just makes it a little more circuitous about how we can see to get there. But give me your perspective. If somebody were to ask you today, what would the metals company need to have an operational capability to land those metals for processing and have a capacity here in the United States in the next 6 to 12 months? What would your answer be?
It's an easy answer. Mm-hmm. It would be make nodule processed material, intermediate material processed in Japan, which is part of the FTA, but in Indonesia as well, by non-entities of concern, non-Chinese controlled, make that IRA compliant. We might sell that material to Korea Zinc. We might sell it even better to straight into the United States. Right. But don't penalize, because there is so much processing capacity. I visited Weda Bay before Christmas in Indonesia. A company, Tsingshan, had 0 employees there in 2017. They have 70,000 people there now. The scale is amazing, because when Indonesia banned the export of nickel laterite ore, it meant that the Chinese came and built everything in Indonesia. So it served the right purpose for Indonesia. But there is so much capacity which we can use to do the first heavy industrial process for our nodules. We're lucky that the same way you process rainforest nickel, which is, of course, rainforest nickel, to get it, you have to remove the rainforest. So it's a horrible solution. But the same RKEF is used to process our nodules, and that produces an intermediate material, 40% nickel, 30% copper, just under 10% cobalt, which could be shipped into the United States. Now, we've also put an application into the DoD grant loan program to carry out a feasibility on building a refinery here in the United States, because turning that intermediate material into battery precursor makes perfect sense. But there's a little bit of money that we need to go and spend to do that. And for us, we could just sell that intermediate material, or we could invest into a refinery in partnership with companies like Korea Zinc or American companies to further add value to that. But the important thing is, when those metals get here, providing some of those other issues that Mr. Kim highlighted are sorted, then once they're in the United States, they can stay in the United States. They never should leave. They can be here for centuries to come. And so the key is, how do you get the metals into the country?
I think that's a great point. And you point out something too, that there is existing midstream refining capability here. Let's use that. Let's not recreate the wheel. We can do the upstream or the high end refining here. Yes. And especially too, that's your conduit that already exists. And that's the timeliness that we can utilize to our benefit. Yes. Mr. Ghahreman, let me ask you. You talk about the recycling. I think it's an incredibly important point for everybody here to gather, and that is that with the existing systems, batteries, materials that we have in the United States, is the greatest repository of rare earth. So the question is how do we unleash that to where we can use it again, to where we can use that in addition to new sourcing? But it's pretty mind-boggling to me that we already have it here. So the question is how do we release it and get it back into the production stream? So give me your perspective. Again, the same sort of question. What would be your suggestions? You gave some great suggestions to us, but what would be the fastest way for us? You talked a little bit about tax credits and other things. What would be the fastest way to operationalize that in a 12 to 18-month period?
12 to 18 months period.
Oh, good.
Absolutely. First, end-of-life materials, the export of those materials will be challenging to establish industry in North America. Because if really we are losing those materials to other countries, then we don't have that in the US and Canada to process that. So that will be really the first one, to have policy in place that looks into the export of the end-of-life products that have the most critical metals as per DoD and DOE that we desperately need in our country. Stockpiling actually is allowed. It can be done a bit more efficiently and in a larger scale and a bit more comprehensively. That would help the companies to build and start producing with the guarantee that they will sell the material into the market eventually, and that would help to establish the market. And the last thing also is on the policy side. Recycling actually brings it back to origin of life. Let's admit that. We sometimes do see some feedback or comments that if the material is recycled because the initial magnet, let's face it, 93% of magnets are manufactured in China. So the magnets that are sitting in the US, 93% chances they are made in China. So sometimes we are told because we are recycling the material that are originated from China, so those are Chinese materials still. But in some other countries and some other departments in the US, actually, recycling is considered origin of life. So if you collect the material in the US, recycle in the US, and put it to different other applications in the US, that material is US-made material. So let's agree. Yeah, I agree on that as well. I think those are really the key elements to support the industry established. Those are the key elements, of course, beyond funding. That basically, to be clear, we are not starting a fair game here. What we are doing here, establishing the companies for the first time in the past 30 years, is challenging because the companies in China have a lot of incentives and different funding process to establish their companies. And this is not apples to apples when we start a company here versus China. So it's challenging. And China is not playing it nice either. For instance, on specifically rare earth elements side, on December 25 of 2023, last December, they had the technology ban for export of any technology outside China. In fact, I was expecting that from what I was seeing as a trend in the market. And we have built Cyclic materials such that at no point any of our technologies, equipment, chemicals, nothing interfaces with China. So we're fully independent. I do have information that some companies in the Western world, in the US, have reached to the growth stage and now they need a lot of equipment from China, but they can't get those. So that becomes part of the challenge. Just a few weekends ago, I think about 2 months ago, China nationalized rare earth elements. So they are consolidating rare earth companies. So they're not going to take it easy on us. It's not going to be an easy process. So to help us to establish the industry in North America, of course, dollars and funds also will be critical to help us go fast.
I think that the July 10th from China essentially says no export of technology for rare earth magnets for calcium oxyborate, which is used in many of the high temperature probes, things that are critical to us. So they're shutting that off, as well as shutting off things like gallium and germanium. So we're going to be on the outside looking in if we don't get things together quickly. Ms. Kim, I want to ask you before we go to Kathy real quick. You have some really good insights about what we can do to partner and create incentives to make sure we operationalize the capacity in companies like Korea Zinc, which I think we absolutely have to do. And the key is for the United States to be able to work with its friends and take down some of the barriers where right now it's tough to work together. It needs to be easier for us to work together with companies like yours and to use the technology that you've already developed, to use the resources that you've already developed. Give us your perspective. Again, in the same framework, if you were to come up and say, United States, this is what you can do in conjunction with your friend and partner, South Korea, over the next 12 to 18 months, what would be your priorities for us to get done?
Thank you very much. And just as I mentioned before, that So it's really important to have it for your side to maybe your information agency already got the information that is so check out the market status there because it's the player in the real world. So we see that we can't offer something like if we offer the tons per tons of 800 for the something like the scrap batteries, and the Chinese, the related companies offer the $1,000 per tons. Something like because of the gap is something like I think is the because of subsidy or the something like they are just not respecting the environmental standards, the OECD standards, something like that, or the human rights or the Chinese labor. So those type of the gaps, we need to make it even. So that's the reason why I'm asking on behalf of the Korea Zinc to make a level playing ground. So, and the Korean companies, as an ally of the US, we are really ready to cooperate. And in addition to the materials, the scrap, the batteries, the black mass we import from the US, we can add some more. That is from the Korean side, the scrap batteries materials, the critical minerals to be back to the US. So what we can assure to our allies, especially to the US, that when we get the tax credit, we can make every effort to bring more to the states. So, but having said that, so we need some assurance that the US is really confident that we see the problem, and at least we should take care of the critical minerals that is included embedded in our batteries of the electric cars. So you have the cars and the batteries and the critical minerals. We do care about those things. It should be kept permanently inside the US and hopefully more from outside. So we want to be ready to cooperate to make it happen. So, thank you.
So what's happening with the advancement of technology, and maybe start with the EV batteries? I mean, it used to, I guess what had typically gone on was go into a smelter, and it was very energy intensive, but I understand there are new innovations now to do other chemical processes on this kind of battery recycling where you're not going to compound the problem. You know, you need to do it in a decarbonized way. What's happening with the technology? Because it would seem that if you're going to do something when it comes to recycling and tax credits, you want to make sure that it's being done as clean and efficient as possible.
Thank you very much for the question. So for the NCM, nickel, chrome, manganese batteries, so we can boast ourselves, so we have the #1 technology in extracting the critical minerals efficiently and emitting the less carbon dioxide. So that's one thing. And the other thing is that in Korea Zinc already announced to achieve the by 2050 will be the renewable energy 100%. So we already invest a lot in Australia. And so for that one, we are constructing a lot of the wind farms and the solar farms together. And based on the solar farms and the wind farms, so we are going to produce the electricity with the electrolyzer to be with the hydrogen. And so in 2050, so we are sure that the economies of scale and also the development of technology, we can assure that all our facilities in Korea will be carbon free. And so our aim is that by 2050, we'll be the green metal producing company. Most of the sources will be from the recycled ones, and the energy will be the clean. So that's our mission. So thank you very much for the question. And
Do you
so
have a peek into China and what's happening there?
we are sure that the refining company that has the double digit of the profit every year. So, and no company, including China, beat us in technology. So this is the fact from the 50 years of history. So, and our technicians are really sure that if we build the refinery outside of Korea or outside of China, and if we compete, we can beat them. Thank you.
What do you see on technological advancements here on recycling and processes?
Environment is absolutely critical. So I will start with saying that recycling company, you are at the vicinity of the city. You are nearby a city and operating from there. So from day one, we had in our mind that we should have a product or a process that takes in the end of life and processes that, and we can operate it nearby people's house, and they should be happy with that. And that has been on our mindset. I will give you some stats of our operation today in Kingston, Ontario, Canada. We have 2 large-scale demonstration plants. Our spoke is running at 1 ton per hour capacity. That's 2,200 pounds per hour end-of-life processing capacity. And our hub is running at 100 ton per year capacity, 24/7. So with those 2 plants, our carbon footprint for rare earth metals is only 35% of mining industry. That's our baseline. And this is for small scale we have. When we go to large scale plant that we are going to put in South Carolina, our carbon footprint will be 15% of mining industry. Our water consumption today in our plant is only 5% of what mining industry consumes. And in South Carolina, our water consumption will be 2% of what mining industry consumes. Those are some really critical numbers to have. Otherwise, being close to cities and having a chemical plant and operation is just not possible, because every single company have to go through the permitting process. But the second thing hidden in your question to some extent is the technology itself. And I will add to the note that after all, when you are in metals business, you produce a commodity. We do not manufacture iPhones that we can tell you $1,500, either buy it or no. We make metals and somebody has an auction in New York or London, and that's the price. So technology is absolutely critical. We have lowest cost technology and lowest operating cost technology and most efficient. To remove the magnets from steel, if I want to, from end-of-life products, if I want to explain that, magnets and iron are really good friends. They like one another. A process is something that for a moment they dislike one another, and we put them into 2 different buckets. That's why we separate magnet from end-of-life products. And that reduces the cost significantly. So we can work with companies and make sure that we guarantee good volumes for them at a preferable cost. That's double important, because the critical metals, when you buy those in China and process and use those inside China, you are forgiven for 13% tax, VAT. And if you export those to outside China to use those outside China as raw materials, you have to pay 13% tax. And having even lower cost for those metals outside China becomes critical.
So you interest on your ideas for some requirements when we export, and making sure that somehow those there's an incentive for recycling or some directive. Can you think of anything in policy that is analogous that we're already doing? I don't know if it's in the defense realm or elsewhere.
On the defense side, the products, end-of-life products, are collected and not exported. So they stay somewhere. I wish that same thing was happening with other end-of-life products. Those are freely traded in the market today. majority of the buyers are from Asia, that it's, the metal is basically purchased. Most of them are shipped away from the ports in California and whatnot, and they go away to India, Pakistan, and process there. So today, simply you can make a couple of phone calls and buy yourself as many tons of those end-of-life products as you want and ship them away. Unfortunately, we don't have any processes in place, legislations in place to regulate that.
Thank you.
So, according to what I have heard or what we know about the recycling of critical minerals, that we have a challenge area when it comes to electronics recycling in particular. And the National Institute of Standards and Technology put forward a paper not too long ago describing some of those challenges related to electronics recycling that included standards. So as Congress tries to expand recyclability of critical minerals, how does electronics recycling fit in? I don't know if any of you have guidance about that or are familiar with that, because we had a hearing not too long ago on the Science Committee about the needs for standards kind of writ large, and, you know, if it's still voluntary or if industry would respond to, and it's not regulation, it'd just be standards. And the reason we had that hearing, this was about 5 years ago, was because we were starting to look at China competitiveness and the fact that when the tide rolled out with other recycled goods, we didn't have really good standards in place in our own country to compete as effectively. But if no one has any comments on electronics, that's fine.
Electronic side, on circuit board side, for instance, for when data is involved, for instance, we do recycle hard disk drives. We don't use hard disk drives in our computers anymore, but the clouds are made of hard disk drives. When you send an email, it goes through the cloud system. Those still use hard disk drives. Those are a bit regulated, much better regulated. And usually to touch those or to have access to those ones, you would need a certificate that is called R2 certificate. And without that certificate, you would not be able to buy those products or end-of-life products in the market and process those. So maybe that's a good place to start.
Yeah, well, it's Castor's point about batteries. Yeah, you know, our phones don't really have the guidance, and so sometimes we overlook or we're trying to source. And coming from Michigan, I spent a lot of time with our manufacturers, and reman principles are absolutely fascinating. And none of that is incentivized. It's just all to reclaim, the materials. And it's always baffled me that, well, of course, they're just remanufacturing, with the steel and the aluminum, and there's no incentive other than the business proposition with that. And so I know if people want what's in there, they're going to find it. It's not that we're just necessarily going to throw it away. But do you also have thoughts about synthetic critical minerals? Is there a promise there? Is there something that we could be doing as a Congress to support synthetic critical minerals through a recyclability process?
I can kind of tell here in this space. Just also to go back to deep sea mining and some of its impacts. What do we need to be doing as a Congress? I've had a couple of different sessions on deep sea mining and the fact that we don't have necessarily the international rules for the road, and we're not leading them, and we're kind of letting China do so. But as we're still somewhat, and you've been around since what, 2017?
2011.
Oh, wow. Doing deep sea mining. So it's not really emerging anymore. It's emerged. But what can we do as a Congress to ensure that the fragile ecosystems found on the seabed or around hydrothermal vents are actually safe from negative impacts, given that it's pretty hard to know what's going on down there to see it?
Well, if we go back to first principles, it makes sense that we carry out extractive industries in parts of the planet where there is the least life. And Brett Wittman and I have had talks about, what goes on in the abyssal plains. If you think about all of the landscapes on our planet, you've got tropical rainforests at one end of the scale where there is the most life. And at the other end, you've got polar ice, where there's no biomass, no living matter. Right next to polar ice is the abyssal plain. Half of our planet is the abyssal plain and the abyssal hills on the deep ocean. It's the area with the least life. What's down there is primarily bacteria and some sea sponges and worms. If you measure it as a biomass measurement, there are grams per square meter compared to dozens of kilograms per square meter on land. And we're pushing into those fragile ecosystems on land. So, what Congress could do is keep an open mind and also consider ocean metals as a critical part of the supply solution. That's the most important thing. I think I hear noises about US ratifying UNCLOS. I'm not here to talk about that. I don't particularly care if they do or they don't, because they can still take advantage over by bringing the metals to the United States, because all these great recycling initiatives can keep them here then. Because we won't be picking these nodules up, I hope, in 50 years' time. In fact, I hope extractive industries will have slowed down because recycling will have taken over the supply of them. But today there are not enough metals in the system. We need a lot more metals because we have this transition away from fossil fuels. We have the ongoing industrialization of the developing world. We have population growth. We need billions of tons more of metals.
Should we be looking at outer space?
Not my cup of tea.
Because you're all the way down there. It's looking at the outer space. The bottom of the
Well, and going back onto how to keep protection, we treat the environment very, very respectfully. We've been, of the $500 million that my company has spent, most of it has been on environmental research. On land, you wouldn't be bothered because there's so much above ground. But in the abyssal plain, there's nothing there, so we've got to look under. We've got to look at the soil. You don't even look at that on land because there's so much else there to look at. But we have looked thoroughly, and our studies are all coming to a conclusion. And the good news is the area recovers very quickly. We found that out by revisiting our collector field where we'd been collecting nodules in 2022 at commercial scale as part of our permitting process. And we went back there a year later, and the area was thriving. The area was, because there's no food down there, or very limited food, and so you make a bit of a disturbance, and all the critters go, something going on over there, let's crawl on over and might be food. And so, the good news is, even though it's 4,000 meters below sea level, the digital twin technology that we are developing with our partners means that the regulator and civil society will have eyes and ears seeing what we're doing.
You can test it before you do it with those digital.
And while we're doing it.
It's amazing.
And while we're
It's amazing.
And then tell me, explain where, from the nodule to the processing, what products are
So this nodule, they go by precipitating the metals that are in the sediment. And so nodules are found in many oceans, but they're often not worth picking up. So there's one field in the Pacific Ocean where they are very valuable, full of nickel and copper and cobalt and rare earths. And that's about 1,000 miles off the coast of Mexico in the Pacific Ocean. And that's because the Rockies and Andes were covered in nickel and copper, and through other seafloor gases, and there was a lot of metals there as the feedstock. And so our focus is very much on nickel and copper and cobalt and manganese. We have also, via an alternative flow sheet, seen how we could recover the rare earths, but we're not focused on them right now. Japan recently announced a massive rare earth deposit in their territorial waters. They think it's 700 years of supply.
so products across the clean economy, EV batteries, and then into the defense.
I mean, what an amazing coincidence that everything you need to build an EV battery cathode is here.
Can I have one? And that is amazing, because, you talk about, what we're trying to do and produce, and I appreciate that this hearing or this roundtable that's being live streamed is focused on the sustainability and non-traditional models. And I think we all share an agreement of lessening a reliance on the CCP and the 98% of refining of critical minerals that has to take place over there. We have, over the course of this term, heard from mining companies and individuals in this space. I, in particular, am rigorously, alongside my colleagues, working on legislative solutions to advance and to develop. I think we are behind in this space, even just in terms of the rulemaking. And, obviously, we don't want to willy-nilly into something, but you've been at it for a while. I've heard about you. I know your company. I appreciate it, and I certainly appreciate the expertise that has been brought forward here today. It's been a real treat to spend this time. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Haley, thank you.
Task Force Leader.
Anything else? Those, I want to thank our witnesses today, an incredibly insightful look into the things that we need to do as a nation. I appreciate your suggestions. I think they are spot on. I know that Ms. Castor and I are working vigorously on some legislation that we hope to get together. One of the important parts of that, as Kathy has pointed out, is the recycling side. And it's so apparent to look at, where the resource is and to be able to re-release that resource and use it again. And then too, look at one of those sometimes unrecognized resources, and that is the deep sea bed. And to understand too, just as Mr. Barron points out, that that part of our environment is pretty stark in its biological activity. So there's not a whole lot of oxygen down there, which means things happen very slowly. The bacteria that are down there, they're pretty resilient, and as you said, the critters down there, the polychaetes and others, are kind of like, just like you plow the field, down there, plowing the nutrients that are there and resuspended for bacteria to use, reinvigorates the environment. So all potentially good things. Again, the science, I think, bears that out. We just need to be focused on that as it relates to that, and let the science inform the public policy. And the science is there's a massive amount that's already been extracted and captured. Let's re-release that in addition to the new sourcing. If we do that, then we have the pathway forward. I'm confident the United States has and will continue to be the leader, being the innovators and creators on Earth. We just need to get out of our own way. And we need to make sure we understand, too, what the Chinese will do, which is they have no intent to play by a fair set of rules. They have no intent to live by the things that we all believe in. That is integrity and how we do things from a moral and ethical standpoint. Listen, I'll be very forthright. They will lie, cheat, and steal to accomplish their ends. No two ways about it. We will not do that. But we need to be aware of the effort that they're willing to put forward, and that this is not a competition. They have no interest in this being a competition. Their interest is to dominate. And if you read their July 10th objective and what they want to do with rare earth, it is astounding. And they're very forthright and unapologetic about what they need, what they want to do, and they want to crush anybody out there that will not abide by what they tell other countries to do, or will not capitulate to China. Pretty sober. So we know we have in front of us. That's why the question I asked you was, what can we accomplish in the next 6 to 12 to 18 month window? You've all been incredibly helpful to us in the things that we need to prioritize. I believe we will get this done. I believe that this work group has a lot of very passionate individuals that are looking at the things that need to be done. And I think all of us here have not only experienced this, but have lived this. So we are all in to make sure we get it done. So thank you all so much again. And we'll continue the conversations with you as we continue to develop public policy here.